the years, October 31st had been seen as a night of dark celebration, when the spirits of the dead returned to wreak havoc on the living. It was a night for mischief, wicked pranks, black cats, and witches. However, as superstition faded, the night became one of fun, of dressing up, bobbing for apples, and begging for candy. The sinister side slowly faded away until something happened. This was 1978, the night that he came home. That night, he tore a bloody rampage through the world of cinema, and suddenly trick-or-treating was lethal again. His name was Michael Myers, and the night was Halloween. In the late 60s and early 70s, American low-budget horror cinema began to move away from fairy tales and gothic monsters and into the modern world. Films like Night of the Living Dead, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and The Last House on the Left pioneered this movement by bringing brutal threats into realistic environments. The 1974 film Black Christmas also combined these elements with a night of celebration. With films like this enjoying success, it was clear that by the mid-70s, audiences were ready to face lethal maniacs and psychotic killers on the silver screen. It was against this backdrop that the idea for Halloween was born.
We had a company called Compass International Pictures, and we were distributors of low-budget pictures. The problem was that we couldn't find any low-budget pictures to distribute. It became apparent that the only way we could make any money is if we started to make some pictures.
I was doing a movie, Line of the Desert. Big epic, we're spending $300,000 a day. They came, they said the whole movie is $300,000. He said the babysitter to be killed by the boogeyman. Not the boogeyman that attracted me, the babysitter. Because every kid in America knows what a babysitter is. They can relate to a babysitter.
And I called John from my bedside, I'll never forget it. And I told him the story. I said, John, I want to make a movie about a babysitter. And I want to make it in one night, and I want to call it Halloween. He got it right away.
He suggested we put it on Halloween night, but play the whole thing on Halloween night, and call the movie Halloween. Because he felt it was a holiday that everybody could identify with, and it hadn't really been done. And since I needed a job, and I wanted to do that kind of thing, I said, sure, I'll do it. And as long as I can have complete creative control, and I get my name above the title, then we'll do it.
A lot of the films prior to Halloween were done by directors who were not really visual storytellers. It was a great treat when I realized that John was completely aware of the camera and how, it was going to be a part of the storytelling.
I don't know how you could see that first movie and not think about that horrifying first scene, on Halloween. Especially if you're the person like me who, generally speaking, might sit home and pass out candy to people, and you're like, my brother's coming somewhere and he's going to stab me,
With the opening shot, the audience knew they were seeing from the perspective of the killer. But what they didn't expect was that the killer would turn out to be a 6-year-old boy. The creative team behind the film was very much aware of cinematic history and the effects of certain techniques on the viewer.
A lot of that stuff comes straight from European horror cinema. And it takes a real clever director to pick up on those things and incorporate them into a film that is considered primarily an American product.
With Halloween, the visual style of the film was inseparable from the story. The innovative photography created a world where danger lurked around every corner, and every empty space had the potential to conceal a threat that went by the name of Michael Myers.
One of the things that John wanted to do was always sort of create this the tension, the suspense in the Michael Myers presence, or even not being there. You know, where was he lurking?
John really is, I would say, the developer of the whole evil concept. He gave Michael Myers that sense of foreboding.
I went down there and asked if I could stick around the set. And he said, okay, fine, but as long as you're going to be here, why don't you do something? And he said, Joe, here, put this on, and you'll be the guy running around with, be the killer.
Everybody played Michael Myers, basically. Even John Carpenter was, even Deborah Hill did one little scene.
In the original Halloween screenplay, Michael Myers was referred to as the Shape.
This is not a human being. This is a shape. And just like the word bogeyman evokes something which isn't really human and isn't therefore susceptible to reason, isn't therefore something you can argue with or debate with or even ask for mercy from.
Michael Myers is essentially the boogeyman. He's the guy who chases you in your dream, who you can't get away from, who you beat down, and he keeps coming.
I think it's not just a matter of new shocks in each movie. There's a sense that you're dealing with an archetypal figure of some kind. One thinks of the Frankenstein monster or Dracula, certain figures that seem to embody larger forces than the specific character.
No matter what you do to Michael Myers, you can stab him in the neck, you can poke out his eye, you can fire 6 bullets into him and make him fall off a balcony, and he's still going to keep coming after you.
There's something very kind of unhuman about him, even though you know he's a human being.
In the same way that Frankenstein was a monster made of human parts, Michael Myers was a monster made of cinematic parts. The camera, the framing, light and shadow, sound, and editing. With all the powers of cinema at his disposal, Michael Myers embodied the means of his creation. He was death itself. Like witches and wizards, he was now a part of the actual night of Halloween.
Death has come to your little town, Sheriff.
The town in question was Haddonfield, Illinois, named after co-writer and producer Deborah Hill's hometown. Standing in the heart of the town is the home of evil itself, the Myers house. The house still stands in South Pasadena, where the majority of the shooting took place. To Halloween fans, the house is a major attraction, and it continues to draw visitors today on an almost daily basis.
But when you have people walk to the house and actually walk up the stairs, they start to cry. That's amazing to have that happen 25 years later.
He still lives. The guy is still here.
The house was due to be demolished in the 1980s, but it was purchased for $1 and physically moved. It now stands at the end of the same street opposite the location used for the hardware store, where Michael Myers stole the knives and masks he would use on his bloody rampage.
I think the fact is that Halloween is set in kind of suburban streets, and certainly for the first portion of the film, the fact that it's in broad daylight, I think is incredibly creepy, and it definitely kind of just nails that it couldn't happen here tone.
The typicality of Haddonfield is absolutely to the point of why the movie works so well. It's every town. It's every place. It could be your town. It could be mine.
It was within this familiar and timeless environment that the lethal game of trick-or-treat would be played out. On one side, The Shape, and on the other side, Laurie Strode, Sam Loomis, and a slew of innocent victims, played by a mix of genre regulars and fresh-faced young talent.
I think Halloween, in some way, has this the style and the feel of other 70s films. I mean, a lot of it, too, was some of the casting like it was, you know, to see PJ Souls and Carrie, than to see her in Rock and Roll High School and to see her in Halloween. Like some of those type of faces that I just, in my brain, are just so, I can't think of 70s without thinking of like people like that.
That's not true. I think about lots of things. Now, why don't we not stand here talking about them and get down to doing them?
She's just out for the privileges, you know. And I think that that's very appealing. That's very identifiable. It's very attractive because we've all been there.
Donald Pleasance played Dr. Sam Loomis, a character directly opposed to Michael Myers, like Van Helsing was to Dracula.
You fooled them, haven't you, Mike? But not me.
With Donald Pleasance, so much of those movies is about him tracking down, it's Moby Dick, it's, you know, Ahab and the whale, and he's constantly tracking him through every film.
I have to bring myself round to seeing it in his way because it's his film. I met this 6-year-old child with this blank, pale, emotionless face and the blackest eyes. It's a little melodramatic, but of course it's not intended to be real in that awful word realistic sense.
The character was a hit with fans and critics and became a regular staple in the Halloween films.
He was a gentleman, you know, very professional, but funny at the same time. He had this way of talking to you that sort of would draw you in.
To this day, most of the actors from the original Halloween are still remembered for these roles.
I was a young actor, and all I kept seeing was my character's name on every page, so I knew it was a big part, and I knew that there were other parts that they were casting, other women, other girls, and I was very much a smart aleck and was a cheerleader in high school, so felt very concerned that I was being considered for the really quiet, repressed young woman, when in fact I was very much more like the other two girls.
Jamie Lee Curtis played Laurie Strode, the unfortunate teenager who dropped off a key at the Myers house and became the killer's intended target.
Michael is much more interested in frightening people than he is in killing them. The killer spends so much more time in the film setting up, basically, practical jokes, setting up the scares. The actual kills are just there to give the scares a frisson, to make sure there's actual danger there. It seems to me that anyone as resourceful as him could easily knock these people off in 5 minutes. What he enjoys is playing with them.
Halloween was the scariest for me because it was about a real man. It wasn't, a monster. It wasn't, Freddy was a monster, Jason, the strange hockey mask, or, someone who'd come back from the dead. It was a man, and it was a man who was going to kill this woman.
All of the elements were in place, and it didn't take long for the public to catch on.
Totally packed house, totally packed audience, and the Halloween experience in the theater was one of the best experiences I've ever had in a movie, because literally people were screaming all around. It was all full of kids, and people were screaming, and it got to the point where I don't want to hear anybody screaming again.
And I thought, oh my God, how can you make something like this? Everybody in the audience was like stunned.
I saw that film at a Directors Guild screening, and I had two lady friends on either side of me, both of whom spent most of the night like this.